Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Bach. I'm the director of UCAN's endurance business. Welcome to the first event of our National Triathlon Week celebration, Never a Bad Day, a presentation by Bob Babbitt, co-founder of Competitor Magazine, co-founder of Challenged Athlete Foundation, Ironman and USA Triathlon Hall of Famer, known by many as the storyteller of triathlon. I've seen this presentation 3 times already, and I still can't wait to watch it again because of the many great stories Bob has to tell about the history of our wonderful sport. I hope you enjoy.
Hey everybody, Bob Babbitt here. Triathlon Week is always one of our favorite weeks of the year. In honor of that, this is my little presentation called Never a Bad Day. When we look back at the history of triathlon, 1974 was the first ever triathlon in San Diego at a place called Fiesta Island. It was part of the San Diego Track Club, was just doing a workout on a Tuesday night, and it involved swimming and cycling and running. They never thought of it as its own sport. It was just a way to work out to become a better runner. Well, during those early triathlons here in San Diego in 74, 75, 76, one of the families that was participating was a guy named John Collins and his wife Judy and their kids. And then John, who was a commander in the Navy, moved to the island of Oahu. And in 1977, there was an article in Sports Illustrated that came out and said that Eddie Merckx was the greatest endurance athlete on the planet, because he had won the Tour de France 5 times. And John Collins and his wife and all their buddies had just finished this run around the island of Oahu called the Perimeter Relay. And they were like, well, wait a second. Why is a cyclist the greatest endurance athlete? Why isn't it the swimmer or the runner? And so John got up in front of the group and goes, we're going to find out once and for all who the best endurance athlete is. We're going to take the Waikiki Rough Water Swim here in Oahu, 2.4 miles, the Around Oahu Bike Ride, 112 miles, and the Honolulu Marathon, 26.2 miles. And we're going to put all 3 together, and we'll call the winner of the Ironman. That was it. And he sort of forgot about it. And one of the servicemen who worked for him kept saying, sir, when are we going to do that iron thing, sir? So he decided in 78 they would put on what was the first ever Ironman triathlon. And that was in 78. This photo is actually from 1979, the second year of the event. And in 1978, there was 15 starters. It looked very similar to this, 15 starters, 12 finishers. And the gentleman in the center of this photo, Gordon Haller with the beard, he would win on this back in 1978. And the guy to a couple over from him with the big face mask on, John Dunbar, would finish second. John Dunbar was a Navy SEAL, and he led for a big chunk of the race. And he got into the run. And remember, this was before aid stations, before blocked off roads. You started in the ocean and you finished in Kapilani Park. And besides that, you were on your own, you and your crew. And John Dunbar's crew during the marathon ran out of water. So they had this thing called beer, and he decided, well, that's better than nothing. So he started drinking beer, and next thing you know, Gordon Haller's passing him and winning the first ever Ironman Triathlon World Championship, 15 starters, 12 finishers. This photo is actually 79, and that's Gordon in the center, and there's John Dunbar, a couple over to his right. And that big matchup was going to be those 2 guys going at it again. And the person next to Dunbar with the blue cap on is Tom Warren. And Tom sort of messed up the party because he was a great swimmer from USC, and he ended up winning that day. But what was important in 79 is that Sports Illustrated came and ended up covering the event. And that Sports Illustrated was ESPN of now, right? Everybody, every Thursday got their Sports Illustrated, and we would read it cover to cover. And a lot of us read this article on the Ironman. Another interesting thing, in 79, for the first time, one woman, Lynn Lemaire. And Lynn, in this photo, fixing her goggles, she ended up riding her way into second place during the race and finishing 5th overall, which showed early on that women would be a huge factor at the Ironman Triathlon World Championship. And Gordon Haller, who won in 78, what was fascinating about Gordon, he was a taxi driver. And what he would do is he would drive people in his taxi, and then every time he'd have a gap of time, he'd go and do a 2-mile run. And he sent me his training log leading into the 78 Ironman, and there were days where he would do 6 and 7 2-mile runs. And during the month and a half or so leading into the Ironman, he he swam twice, he rode twice. I think his longest ride was like 30 miles. But on race day, and he was a 2:27 marathoner. On race day, he was ready to rock and roll, and he ended up winning that first year. John Collins, Judy Collins here with the trophy. Now that trophy, John came up with the idea of the hole in the head trophy because you have to be a little crazy to do this thing called the Ironman. The funny part is a few years ago, I recreated the Ironman over on the island of Oahu as a fundraiser for our Challenged Athletes Foundation. And Judy had never done the Ironman. So I invited John and Judy to come. John made these trophies for all of our finishers. And Judy was actually doing the entire race. And we have no cutoff times, just like in the original Ironman. And John was her support person. As she's running up Diamond Head, he's following her in his van. And the police actually pull him over because they think he's stalking this woman in the middle of the night running through Waikiki. And I actually get a phone call from the police wondering what's going on. And I'm going, listen, this is a real deal. He's not stalking her. They're actually the creators of the Ironman. And it was really cool having them back. Also, John decided the night before that Ironman Revisited that he was going to weld all these trophies in the hotel room. And the hotel manager called me that this guy was potentially burning down his hotel during the middle of the night, welding these silly trophies. A lot of interesting history there. So here's the article, Sports Illustrated, 8-page feature ad that led to myself, a guy named Dave Scott, who ended up winning the Ironman 6 times. Dave McGilvery puts on Boston Marathon, guy named Chuck Newman. All of us came over. So the event grew from 15 starters and 12 finishers to 108 in 1980 because of that. And again, this was the last year on the island of Oahu. So this is Tom Warren winning the 1979 Ironman and one of his friends running with him. This is myself in the dark beard and my buddy Ned Overend. And the two of us actually went over to Ironman together in 1980. But before that, we had met rock climbing down in Mexico. And we had done, Tom Warren, who won the Ironman, we had done his event, which was called the Tug Swim Run Swim. And the cool part about the Tug Swim Run Swim was a half-mile swim, followed by a 5-mile run on the beach, followed by a half-mile swim. And the key was when you came out of the water, you went through the finish line and you ran over to Tommy's bar, which was called Tug's Tavern. And when you got to the bar, if you were in the first 75 finishers, you got a plate of runny eggs and you got a Tug's glass. And that was the top 75 people got that. And if you finished 76, you got nothing. So getting those bragging rights and standing there with your eggs and your glass was really important for Ned and I. We were pretty jazzed. So when we read the article about the 79 Ironman, it's not like you could go online and find out where to sign up for this thing. So what we did was we tracked down Tom Warren, and because he lived in San Diego and we had done his event. And we were like, Mr. Warren, sir, could you tell us a little bit about this? And he's like, yeah, come on down to my office. Well, he told us his office on the west side of the street, on the north side of this pier called Crystal Pier, and we should meet him there. We figure we'll go down there and do his office. Well, there's no office. There's a motorhome with running shoes tied around the side view mirror and a paddleboard on top and a bike on the back. And I put my head in, and he's like, Babbitt, welcome to my office. And he had a payphone behind him. He would go to the payphone, and he had a roll of dimes in his console, and he would call and order beer for the bar and order tortilla chips, whatever he needed to do. And then he'd go and ride and run and swim. He basically was doing Ironman equivalent type events on his own pretty much every day. When we went to the bar right behind his motorhome at like 10 in the morning, we're asking him all these questions. How do you train for this? How do you get a bicycle? All this stuff that now you can go online and find out. We had no idea. So I said to Tommy, it's like, Mr. Warren, tell us more about how do we get into this thing? And as he's explaining the Ironman and training for it, he's got a magic marker in his hand and a beer. And every time he takes a sip of his beer, he's making a mark on his arm. And we're like, well, this is our mentor. He's telling us how to do this iron thing. Mr. Warren, sir, could you explain the magic marker? And he goes, well, I have a little bit of a drinking problem. I make a mark on my arm until I get to my sleeve, and then I go home. And that's when we realized that this guy was a little eccentric. And we got back to his house, and he had a a bike on a stationary bike in a sauna in his house, and he was riding 5 hours a day. That's when we realized that this was a pretty crazy deal. So anyways, we sent our $25 in and we figured out how to sign up for it, and then had to go out and figure out how to get equipment. This is actually me with the equipment that I bought for this race. And this is me actually coming after I came out of the water at that 1980 Ironman. And what's fascinating about it, that's my $75 police auction bike. The whole back end had been burned in a fire. And you can see my Radio Shack radio, which is mounted on the front there with bungee cords. I didn't know how to change a tire, so I had flat-proof tires on there. I actually had panniers, sleeping bag, and tent on the back of the bike because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, rode back the next day, and ran the marathon, which if you think about it, makes a hell of a lot more sense. That beer was obviously very aerodynamic and really, really good in the water. Having a big sponge like that on your face is always a good thing. Nowadays, if you finish number 3 in the race, you get number 3 as your race number next year. Me, I actually sent my $25 in third, so I got I was number 3. I'm the only guy in history to do Ironman with khaki shorts and a leather belt, long sleeve cotton shirt, probably not the best thing for the island of Oahu. What you don't see is on the back of this bike jersey, I'd sewn a pocket and had, with my support crew, like 50 loaves of Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade, because who knew? We didn't know what to use nutritionally and how to train for this thing. So we, Ned and I, when we got over to the island, the night before the race director calls us into this meeting. And now, because Sports Illustrated covered the event, ABC Wild World of Sports decided they were going to come over and they're going to cover it in 1980. So the manager of the event, this guy Hank, says, "Hey guys, it's great that everybody's here, and we're so excited that ABC is going to be covering the event. The problem is they're here to shoot cliff diving on Sunday. Tomorrow, we're not sure if we'll be able to get boats out to protect you guys because the surf was so big that while we're in there for this meeting, the surf is breaking 10 feet up on the wall of this hotel. And Ned and I, who did all of our swimming in a 120 length of a mile condo pool, we basically we knew we were going to die. There was no way we were going to get out there to surf. So the race director's like, listen, because we need ABC Wide World of Sports, we're keeping the event tomorrow no matter what. But I'm moving the swim from the Waikiki Rough Water Swim to the Ala Moana Channel, which you guys will swim 4 lengths. Now, we had Dave Scott and all these Navy SEALs who were not very excited about moving the swim because they're like, what a wussy event. You can't move the swim. And then they're like, yeah, you can't move the swim, knowing that we were actually going to live. So we end up going out there. My crew, I had as a PE teacher, and one of the kids I taught in San Diego, her dad lived over on Oahu. He showed up in his Fiat convertible with his couple girlfriends, and he had all my loaves of Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade. And I'm out there doing this swim. It's 4 lengths of this channel, and I've swim down, and I'm on my way back to finish lap 1 of this 4-length swim. And there's a guy in the race. His name is John Huckabee. He's 59 years old, from the East Coast, and his claim to fame was that he'd run the Athens Marathon back to back to back all in one day, over 75 miles, which is cool, but he couldn't swim. He had no idea how to swim. So he got in the water and he swam. He was actually walking, moving his arms through the water like this. And I had done my first length, and I'm on my way back, and I nearly run into Huck, who is seriously walking and moving his arms in the shallowest shallowest part of the bay that he could find. And he's the only guy in the history of the Ironman to get blisters on his feet during the swim portion of the Ironman Triathlon World Championship. I get out of the water and I get on my steed here, right? I'm all excited. I can't believe I finished the swim. I'm tuning in my radio and I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing ever. I can't believe I'm doing this thing. And I get to about mile 25 and there's my crew on the side of the road. It looks like they're going to do a Tour de France handoff. And I get a brown bag with a Big Mac, fries, and a Coke. At mile 90, I got a root beer snow cone. When I come in at the end of the bike, all of a sudden I hear this music, and I see my crew with a bamboo mat and a boom box, and I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing ever. I'm going to get a massage. And they're like, How about a massage? Perfect. So I got a 45-minute massage between the bike and the run, which is probably not the best thing for your time, but who the hell cares? It was all about having a good time. So now I start running. And they had a rule back then. They had scales on the course. We had to get off our bike a couple of times. Now during a run, if you lost 5% of your body weight, they were going to pull you out of the race. Where the science came from, I have no idea. So anyways, I'm running along, and early on, I stop, and I get weight. And then I'm eating Hawaiian sweetbread, and I'm drinking Gatorade, and I'm waddling through Waikiki. And I get to about mile 5 or 6, and there's a weigh station. And I get up on the scale, and I can hear the guy in the walkie-talkie. He's like, "Hey, this guy's gained 4 pounds. He can't gain weight during this." And I was like, I could gain weight during this. Then we get out on the marathon course, and now all of a sudden I'm feeling good. And I'm coming up Diamond Head, and my crew's behind me with their Fiat convertible, the lights on me, and I'm running up Diamond Head, and I'm thinking to myself, this is the coolest thing ever. I never thought I was going to finish this in one day. There's going to be bands, there's going to be cheerleaders, there's going to be all sorts of action at the finish line. And I come down in the darkness, and I come into Kapiolani Park, and I see a light bulb over top, and there's a chalk line on the ground. And all of a sudden I hear this voice in the darkness out to the right. He's like, "Hey, you." I'm like, "Yeah." "You in the race?" "Yeah." "You're done." That was it. There was nobody there. It was one guy doing one-arm push-ups and me. But when I walked away from that finish line, I just felt like I had changed my perception of me. I had done something that I never thought I could do, especially in one day. There was another guy in the race that day named Dave Scott. And here's Dave winning the Ironman. Tom Warren's time had been 11:15. Dave went 9:23. And at that point, he was a swim instructor up in Davis, California. And that's his parents behind him in a rented station wagon carrying a spare bike on the roof of the car. The funny part is, a movie came out in '79 called Breaking Away. And in the movie, Dave Stoller, the star of the movie, he can't get his bike cleat, his shoe, into the pedal. So they end up duct taping his foot to the pedal. Well, Dave couldn't get his foot into the pedal. So his crew duct taped his foot to the pedal for 112 miles, which is not something you normally do. But Dave went on to winning his first title in 1980, his last title in '87, and then came back to, at the age of 40 in 1994, after 5 years away, one of the greatest comebacks in history, to take second place to Greg Welch in the 1994 Ironman. So when we look at the moments that made a difference in our history, in '79, Sports Illustrated came out and covered the event. 1980, ABC Wide World of Sports. 1982, Wide World of Sports is there again, and what they captured that day changed the face of our sport forever. You had 2 co-eds. You had Julie Moss and Kathleen McCartney. Julie, who you see in this photo, was leading the race throughout a big chunk of the marathon. Got to the point where she had turned onto Kuakini and was heading towards the lead drive when her body ran out of gas. And what ABC captured was what I call the original reality television. You had the whole world watching as this woman came apart at the seams. And when Dave Scott won in 1980 and John Howard won in 1981, people watching on ABC Wide World of Sports really couldn't relate to those guys. John Howard was a 3-time Olympian, a Pan American Games gold medalist. Dave Scott was this uber athlete. Now they're watching this woman who's 22 years old, who could have been your daughter, could have been your babysitter. She's got red hair, freckles, a trucker's cap on, a borrowed bra, and we're watching her having what could be the worst moments of her life. She is leading this race and taking ownership of winning this race, and gets to within 50 feet of the finish when she collapses again, and she's like Bambi trying to get up, and Kathleen McCartney runs by her to win the race. And Kathleen has no idea. She doesn't see Julie on the ground. She has no idea she has won. All she knows is she's made up about 20 minutes during the run portion to win this classic race. And as Kathleen goes by, the camera zooms back on Julie, and you watch her put one hand in front of the other because she can't stand up or walk. And you see her collapse on that finish line. She has crapped herself. She has totally bared her soul and was as raw as it could possibly be. And you see her on this crossing the finish line, stretching her arm across the finish line, and then getting carried away on a stretcher. And then back in those days when Wildwood Sports covered an event, they would cover 3 events during the same show. So they go right from Julie collapsing on the finish line to ice dancing. And so people watching at home who were now entranced about what was going on started calling Wide World of Sports and calling ABC Sports on their phone lines going, what the heck? Is this woman alive or dead? They had no idea if Julie was alive or dead. So they ended up having to fly Julie and Kathleen to New York to be on with Jim McKay, the dean of ABC Sports, to assure the American public that this sport does not kill people. And that moment was so important because that led to Ironman moving the event to October. So they had 2 events in 1982. October was a better month for people around the world to train for. Also, the United States Triathlon Series, which was a series of shorter triathlons, launched in June of 1982. And that was because of Julie and Kathleen and the stars of that series before, Dave Scott, Mark Allen, Scott Molina, and Scott Tinley. But the women, Kathleen and Julie, because of what happened on ABC Wild World of Sports, that was what became the essence of the United States Triathlon Series and why it grew so quickly. And it showed again that women were going to have a huge role in the growth of the sport of triathlon. So throughout the 80s, there was 3 television networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And those 3 networks, that was it. You were watching television, that was it. And from what happened with Julie and Kathleen, now there's an interest in watching what's going on with the Ironman triathlon. And the cool part is Ironman would be in October. It really wouldn't air till winter time. So people sitting in Pittsburgh or New York, they're thinking to themselves, I'm indoors anyways, and look how beautiful this is. And what they watched throughout the 80s was this classic battle they would see every year between Dave Scott and Mark Allen. And Mark is wearing number 3 here, and Dave is wearing number 1. And the first time they met in 1982, Dave Scott is leading, and this is a guy who's already won the race once. And this is in October of '82. Dave is riding up towards Javi, and Mark catches him. And Mark, at that point, they knew so little about him with ABC that they actually just had his name spelled Alan. They had no idea who this guy was. Well, he catches up to Dave, and being a little bit of a smart ass, he's like, hey, Dave, what if we go for a run after this? And Dave, not amused, puts his bike into a bigger sprocket. And Mark tries to do the same, and his derailleur falls off the bike, out of the race. The following year in '83, he gets 3rd. In '84, which is this photo is from, he gets a 13-minute lead on Dave after the bike ride. Dave runs him down by mile 13. Mark is walking. In '85, neither of them raced because there was no money. In '86, there was in '86 there was money for the first time, $100,000, and Dave wins. Mark is second. '87, Dave wins. Mark is second. 1988, here's Dave winning, won over and over again, winning his 6 titles throughout the 80s. In 1988, Mark was the favorite because Dave Scott pulled out the night before the race. And we're thinking this is going to be the year Mark is finally going to win, because every year people were watching this guy, Mark Allen, who won everywhere else on the planet, and Dave Scott, who won in Kona. He owned Kona. Mark owned Nice. He owned every other race. He won the first ever short distance, Olympic distance world championship in Avignon, France in '89. So here's '88. And with Dave out of the race, Mark flats a couple of times and ends up in 5th place. And so at that point, Mark was really seriously thinking about giving up on going Ironman because he was not having success there. So that led to 1989. And I owned Competitor Magazine at the time. And my feeling was that '89 was going to be the year. We were going to have a race. There's going to be Dave Scott and Mark Allen, and those guys were going to go for it, and it's going to be phenomenal. So I called Dave up in Davis, California, and said, Dave, I want to do a photo with you and Mark. And he said, that's great. Have Mark come out here to Davis. I called Mark in Boulder. said, Mark, I want to do this photo shoot with you and Dave. Says, great, have Dave come here to Boulder. Neither of them was moving. This is like March. And neither of them for this October event was willing to be together to take a photo. So I sent Dave Epperson, our photographer, and he took a backdrop and went up to Davis and shot Dave. He went out to Boulder and shot Mark. We put them together, and the cover of the October 88 issue was Showdown on the Kona Coast. And I remember interviewing Dave earlier that spring and saying, what do you think is going to happen? He goes, well, I'll tell you what's not going to happen, because Scott Molina had run a 3:02 marathon in 88 to win the race. And Dave goes, listen, if someone runs 3:02, they're going to be 3 miles down the road, because someone's going to run in the low 240s this year at this marathon, and there's only 2 of us who can do that. And if you think back on it, Dave Scott, when the course record was 11:15, he went 9:23. Then he was the first guy to go under 9 hours, the first guy to go under 8.5 hours, first guy to run the marathon under 3 hours, and the first guy to run the marathon under 2:55 and then under 2:50. He was the Roger Bannister of the Ironman. He changed everything. And Mark knew if Dave was talking about running low 240s, that he's going to have to do that too. So then we get into race day. And on race day in 1989, Mark Allen and Dave Scott had a race for the ages that we call Iron War. They were 1 second apart in the swim. They were 1 second apart in the bike ride. And in the marathon, they ran side by side for 23.5 miles. Coming up the last hill before dropping down on Polani, what we call Pay and Save Hill, Mark Allen finally gets away and he ends up winning. And I always felt it was so important for Mark to win that day, because if he had won in 88 with Dave not being there, it wouldn't have meant as much. But think of it this way. So in 89, Dave Scott had a course record that he'd set back in 86 of 8:28. In 89, he went 8:10. He ran a 2:42 marathon. And Mark Allen, on the greatest day that Dave Scott ever had, ran a 2:41 marathon and went 8:09 and broke Dave Scott's course record by over 18 minutes. It was that epic of a day. And there's Mark Allen going 8:09:14. And I'll show you my classic, the bobbleheads, Dave Scott, Mark Allen bobbleheads. That's how important a moment was. We have bobbleheads that go along with it. So a lot of times with the Ironman, people tend to take it too seriously. They've got $10,000 bikes. They know exactly how much nutrition to take. It's a different era. My buddy Corey Folk decided in the late 90s that he was going to debunk this. You don't need a $10,000 bike. So he has his Schwinn Typhoon that cost him $25. I think he spent $30 on the spray paint. And he qualified, and he rolls us in the transition. And they're like, sir, you can't have a kickstand on your bike at the Ironman World Championship. So Corey takes his kickstand off. Then they can't fit the tires into the racks because they're too thick. So he puts his kickstand back on. On race day, he comes out of the water. He actually had Jolly Ranchers in his basket on the front, and that was his nutrition. And as he was riding along, he rode barefoot, 112 miles barefoot on his 65-pound Schwinn Typhoon. He told me when he was riding back from Hawi, he was going so fast he was sucking people's Oakleys right off their heads. He actually had rolls of quarters. He would stop and call different radio stations and do reports from the course on race day. And he finished riding his Schwinn Typhoon to show that anybody can finish the Ironman. It's all about the mentality. Well, Ironman came up with a rule after that, the Corey Folk rule, no cruisers at the Ironman. So what does he do? He goes and gets a fixie. And he did the Ironman on a fixie a couple of times. And we're talking on the downhills, he's spinning 220 RPM and he feels like his kneecaps are going to come off. And he told me that riding the fixie was way harder than being on the cruiser. And now they have another rule, Corey Folk rule, no fixies at the Ironman Triathlon World Championship. Jim Mclaren. Jim Mclaren was a 300-pound football player at Yale. And in 1985, he was taking acting class in New York City. And he's on his motorcycle going to class when he gets hit by a New York City bus. Thrown 90 feet in the air, dead on arrival. He ends up losing his lower leg, comes back from that on a walking leg, not a high-tech leg like you have today, and ran a 3:16 marathon. Then I met him in Kona. He went 10:42 in Kona on a walking leg. Changed perception about what somebody could do with a prosthetic leg, became the Babe Ruth of amputee athletes. And so I'm covering Jimmy. He's traveling the world. He's racing, and he's sponsored by Budweiser and profiled by Designs, and everybody knows who he is. He's very identifiable. In 1993, he's racing the Mission Viejo Orange County Performing Arts Center Triathlon up in Orange County. And he's on his bike. A van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. A guy who's already an amputee becomes a quadriplegic. And at that point, myself and my two close friends, Rick Kozlowski and Jeffrey Esikow, got together and decided that we needed to do something for Jimmy. I had covered through Competitor a lot of wheelchair athletes. And the one thing that I'd hear from them when I'd ask them, what's the worst part about your new lot in life? And invariably it would be, I'm 30 years old, here come mom and dad back in my life, no sense of self or independence. So we decided we were gonna do a little triathlon, and we are gonna raise $25,000 and buy Jimmy a van with hand controls to give him independence. That was it. So we do the triathlon, we raise $49,000, and we figure our job is done. And 3 amputee women come up to us and they're like, listen, it's great what we did for Jimmy, but did you know that if you get injured, your health insurance covers a walking around leg or an everyday wheelchair? Nothing to do with sport is covered because insurance companies consider sport a luxury item. I think all of you guys out there watching know sport is not a luxury item. It's a huge part of who we are and what we do. And so at that point, we got our 501(c) and decided to start the Challenged Athletes Foundation. And now it's been 26 years. We sent out over 26,000 grants, raised over $112 million. In March, right before COVID struck, we sent out 3,921 grants, totaling $5.9 million to athletes in all 50 states in Puerto Rico and in 43 countries. We've now sent out grants to over 73 countries. More importantly, grants in 103 different sports. I had no idea there were 103 different sports, but there are. And Jim Mclaren led to this young man named Emmanuel Afosu Yeboah from Ghana. People out there, I had no idea where Ghana was. I thought it was near Cleveland. I was a little surprised. So this young man was born in Ghana, and he was born with a deformed right leg. And in his country, if you have a deformity of any sort, you are a second-class citizen. So his dad deserted the family because he didn't want to be associated with this young man with a disability. And in Ghana, it's considered a curse if you have a child with a disability. People in Ghana end up begging on the side of the road. That's what they do. So this young man's mother was carrying him back and forth to school. And he had basically missing a tibia, so he had a fibula sticking out the back of his leg with a foot on it. When he turned 13, his mom became very ill, and he decided that he was going to do something, that he was going to leave school and shine shoes for a couple dollars a day to take care of the family. When he turned 18, his mom passed away, and he decided to do something to honor her life. So he decided to ride 600 kilometers across Ghana on one leg on a mountain bike. And nobody believed he could do it. And so media and people were running after him like he was Forrest Gump. This kid, he had applied to us at Challenge Athlete Foundation for a grant for this bicycle, and for a mountain bike actually. And when he applied for the grant, he sent us a typewritten grant request that a missionary had found Challenge Athletes Foundation online. And this grant request had his birth date on there, Cinco de Mayo. Well, that's my birthday. So we decided to send him the bike. We have no idea that he'll ever use it or do anything with it. And then he rode that 600 kilometers across Ghana on one leg on a mountain bike. And there's ticker tape parades and people following through the country. We decided to bring him to San Diego to do our San Diego Triathlon Challenge, which we started for Jim Mclaren. And he comes to San Diego. He's got $3 in his pocket. He's never been out of Ghana, never been on a plane, does our 56-mile bike ride on one leg on a mountain bike. And I'm like, Emmanuel, what'd you think of the bike ride? Bob, I did not know San Diego was so hilly. So at that point, we sent him to Loma Linda Hospital, which was one of our sponsors, to see if he's a candidate for prosthetic. And the hospital says that he is. So we do a deal that we'll take care of the cost of the leg and cost of transportation. and they'll take care of a homestay and the operation. So fly Emmanuel back to Ghana. And I start thinking about it. If we don't capture what this young man is going to be going through, getting this leg, and then what happens next, it's a huge miss. So I had worked with the Ironman with a woman named Lisa Lax, who produced all of the NBC features, the Ironman. She produced the Olympic features, and her twin sister, and she had won 13 Emmy Awards. Her twin sister Nancy produced the Tour de France for CBS. And the two of them had just left television to start a documentary film company. So I reached out to the two of them and said, listen, I don't know if this is a documentary, but this is an amazing story. I'd love it if someone could capture this young man when he comes in and gets his leg, and be there when he does our bike ride next year with 2 legs rather than 1. That was it. That's all I was thinking about. And they're like, that sounds great. When's he coming? Like 6 months? And I'm like, no, 5 days. So they get a crew on a plane. They go to Ghana. They start shooting his leg the way it was. They follow him to Loma Linda, where he has the operation. And 6 weeks after the operation, he does a triathlon. He runs 3 miles in this leg, rides 10 miles, and does a 150-yard swim in a pool. Then flies back to Ghana, and there is seriously a ticker tape parade through the town of Koforidua with Emmanuel, who's in a country with a per capita income of $400, is wearing a $15,000 leg. So Lisa and Nancy are following all that. He comes back the following year and does our bike ride with 2 legs rather than 1, in 4 hours rather than 7 hours. He receives our Most Inspirational Athlete Award from Robin Williams. We fly him up to Nike to receive the Casey Martin Award for people who are inspirational to the disabled. And it comes with a $25,000 grant, which we match. So now he's our ambassador to Ghana with $50,000. Then we send Emmanuel to New York to have a sit down with Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, to talk about the rights of the disabled in Ghana, because he was from Ghana. Then Lisa and Nancy sent a rough cut of the film to Oprah, who agrees to narrate a film that's going to become known as Emmanuel's Gift. And then Lisa and Nancy pitch ESPN on Jim and Emmanuel receiving the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. So imagine we're sitting in this theater in LA, and Matthew Perry from Friends is the host. He introduces Oprah. Oprah walks out. She introduces this feature on Jim and Emmanuel, narrated by Kiefer Sutherland, that's 13 minutes long. It is beautiful. And then when it's done, Oprah comes back out, and all of them are embracing, and you look in the audience, and Bill Walton is crying, and LeBron James, and all of the legends of sport for our little charity are finally understanding what we do. One other person was watching by the name of President George Bush, because we were going to be showcasing the film and premiering the film at the National Geographic Theater the following weekend in DC. And we get a call that President Bush would like to meet Emmanuel. So this is 15 years ago in 2005. And we are actually at the White House waiting to meet President Bush, and we're watching on TV there the bombings in the London subway. And we're thinking, this isn't happening. We're never going to see the president. There's too much happening in the world right now. Well, they escort us into the Oval Office, and Rumsfeld and Cheney are sprinting out of the Oval Office to deal with the world issue. And we're standing in a semicircle, my partner from Competitor Magazine, John Smith, myself, Emmanuel, and the most powerful man in the world, President George Bush. And President Bush immediately is like, so, Emmanuel, what I appreciate is you were never looking for government help. You were looking to make a difference on your own to the disabled in your country. But tell me, when you ride your bike, do you ride SPD pedals? Do you ride cages? Do you ride flat pedals? I don't know how you ride your bike. Well, at that point, Emmanuel's wearing a gown, right? He has Ghana garb on, which is a gown. And so he wants to show the president how his leg works. And he reaches down to disconnect the knee, to disconnect and show the president how his leg works. And it makes an audible click, which the Secret Service was not very happy about. And they start moving towards us. The next thing you see is President Bush with this leg in his hand. And at that point, the next day, the guy who set up this trip for us to meet the president sends us a note that says, hey guys, just want to let you know, we keep a list of the firsts that happen in the Oval Office. The first person to take their leg off in the Oval Office, Emmanuel Ofosu-Yeboah from Ghana. The byproduct of all this, the president of Ghana had not been supporting Emmanuel in his quest to get a Disability Act passed in Ghana. So now Emmanuel's on the front page of the papers in Ghana with the most powerful man in the world, President Bush. And when Emmanuel got back to Accra, the capital of Ghana, the president of Ghana was there to meet him and told him that he would get his Disability Act presented to Parliament, and 6 months later was passed. Funny story, a couple years later, 2010, I'm riding mountain bikes down in Texas, the Warrior 100. President Bush invited Challenge Athlete Foundation athletes and some of our directors to ride. So we finished the first day, and I'm waiting in line to do the handshake with President Bush and get a photo. And I walk up, I'm like, President Bush, you know, you probably don't remember, but a few years ago, we met in the Oval Office. I was with a young man from Ghana. He goes, Emmanuel, how's Emmanuel doing? I never did find out. Does he ride SPDs? Does he ride flat pedals? Does he ride cages? I'm like, President Bush, this Disability Act that he wanted to get passed is now passed, and a big part of that is because of you. So that was a pretty cool moment for Emmanuel, for Jimmy, and for myself, and for Challenge Athletes Foundation. This is that first ever Ironman, actually the second ever Ironman back in 1979, 15 starters, 12 finishers. This is what Ironman looks like today, with thousands of participants around the world, thousands of finishers. Our sport became an Olympic sport in 2000, a Paralympic sport in 2016, and all of that was because of those pioneers back in 1978 who jumped in the water doing the swim at the Waikiki Rough Water Swim, having no clue if they could actually do the thing. So 20 years after Ironman started, it started in 78. So in 98, Michael Collins was a young man who was the son of John and Judy Collins. And we're standing there together at the finish line in 1998 on the 20th anniversary. And I'm standing there with Michael. And Michael everybody was finishing, they're stopping their watch, and they're like, their goal was 11:10, they finished 11:30. It's like, I had a bad day. I had a bad day. And Michael just looks at me and goes, these people have no idea what a bad day is. Because Michael had done the Ironman in 79. He was 16 years old. There was no age limit back then. He was out there over 24 hours. He had problems. He lost his bicycle. He lost his crew. Everything that can go wrong went wrong. He was out there for over 24 hours. And so he looks at me and goes, these people have no idea what a bad day is. You know what a bad day is? A bad day is when you're walking the Ironman marathon course. You've been out there for 24 hours, and the paper boy is going by you delivering papers with results of a race that you're still in. That, my friend, is a bad day. I want to wish all of you guys the best of days in all your racing and training. Thank you so much for taking time. Huge thank you to UCAN, my favorite product on the planet. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.